important. So I want to, in a moment, turn this over to Steve Stoya, who will be moderating this panel, looking forward and with a focus on the draft 2026 action plan. Big thanks to Steve and John Battles, who lead a really important part of our task force, which is the Scientific Advisory Committee, that's ensuring that all the work that we're doing across the task force is based in the best available science. And that's saying something in 2025, given defunding and attacks on science. So Steve, huge thanks for all the work that you do, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. So I'm going to serve as the moderator for this session, which is the looking forward, which is essentially a overview of the draft 2026 action plan. The intent of this session, as Secretary Crowfoot alluded to, will consist of 3 independent panels, which will represent each of the 3 parts, as you can see on the screen here above the executive committee, the components of the action plan. Part 1 is a science-backed framework toward achieving resilience. And we'll, in a moment, hear from Drs. Jonathan Long and John Battles. Part 2 is mobilizing regional plans, which captures the framework at a regional level and align and streamline elements of the project life cycle, everything from planning to assessment and everything in between. And then the third part of the action plan is the interagency shared strategies and recommendations. And today we'll just get a snapshot of about 4 of those of the some 20-odd different strategies in the action plan. So if you've been tracking or are a part of the development of this action plan, like I know many of you are, you know that science and data have been a consistent through line of this approach. Anchored to the science building blocks, which will you hear from 2 panelists, as I just mentioned, how the 10-year roadmap will be honing our treatment priorities so that we can achieve the greatest return on investment as a means to treating landscapes to realize societally and ecologically relevant outcomes. We will hear this both through the lens of community protection and ecological resilience with a focus on beneficial fire. So first, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Long. He formerly worked for the USDA Forest Service as a research ecologist and also a planner, and now works with us at the USDA California Climate Hub. He'll present on the draft roadmap designed to protect communities and restore resilient landscapes throughout California. Jonathan.
Okay. All right, thank you. I've had the pleasure to work with the task force and Climate Hub staff and John and others to work for that past few months to take science and figure out how we're going to lay out a roadmap for treatment to achieve landscape resilience goals over the next decade. And we're going to end up talking about acres and miles, but the intent is to target the highest hazards, the highest priorities. So there's multiple sources of scientific information that are the building blocks for this work. We've talked about outcomes from recent treatments were presented in the last session, the science advisory panels, science synthesis, CAL FIRE's forest and rangelands assessment work, which is currently being updated, and state and federal modeling efforts, including work done by previous state agencies, as well as the federal government, and modeling efforts were convened by the task force that John Battles is going to discuss next. We considered findings from these recent modeling efforts, CARB, the scoping plan, CAL FIRE, American Forest report had particular objective of reducing carbon emissions, while the U.S. Forest Service has done work on analyzing community wildfire exposure, as well as identifying priority areas based on wildfire and tree mortality risks. That's part of its emergency situation determination. The modeling done for the task force uses assumptions that were very comparable to those used by CAL FIRE and American Forest, and many of the metrics that we're using are similar to the approaches used by the U.S. Forest Service. So to talk about some of the key findings that for landscape resilience that have come out of recent assessments, includes an increase the percentage of wildfire area burning at high severity in conifer forest. So from about 18 to 20% during the late 1990s and early 2000s to 26% in the past decade. And that's, comparing to less than 10% high severity fire historically under frequent fire regimes. And that increased size of high severity patches is causing additional challenges along with a changing climate. It's increasing the need for post-fire treatment. And the USDA Climate Hub effort is completing analysis that finds over 1 million acres and the range of 1.3 million acres that likely need active reforestation based on recent high severity fires. CAL FIRE also notes that there's 17 million acres at high wildfire hazard, including 11 million acres of forests. And a lot of the work that's been done with the modeling, and John will discuss further, targeting the areas of high wildfire hazard yields outsized benefits for community and landscape resilience. And numerous assessments and reviews going back for decades have emphasized the need for more frequent beneficial fire in wildland areas, especially in forest and to some extent in shrublands. This map illustrates some of the current wildfire challenges. We have 23 million acres of forest and woodlands, as well as some shrublands that are burning much too infrequently. That's highlighted in the blue on the map. And that's especially in the mountain regions and in Sierra Nevada, Northern California. But when fires do occur, they're often increasingly occurring as severe reburns that cause persistent shifts to extensive shrublands. And meanwhile, in 2 million acres of shrublands, especially in Central and Southern California, fire is occurring too frequently, which causes shifts to non-native annual grasses. Southern California also has densely populated areas that are vulnerable to accidental ignitions during extreme wind events. And because of these factors, we've organized the roadmap into 2 main regions, while recognizing that treatment strategies will need to be tailored to local needs. Landscapes are experiencing more stress due to the warming climate. Recent inventories indicate that forests in California have become a net source of emissions, but losses can be reduced, and in part using wood utilization to take that extra material that's out in the forest and turning it into durable products or offsetting energy emissions. CAL FIRE American Forest Modeling projects that if management continues under the business as usual track that existed before the first action plan before 2021, California would lose half of its forest areas and carbon stocks due to wildfires within the next 50 years. And other modeling projects that we're on course to lose all old forest habitat in the Sierra Nevada under the management trajectories that existed prior to 2022. Wildfire smoke has become a major impact across California in recent decades. We're seeing heat waves, smoke waves unleashed by warming climate that's causing impacts like we saw in the summer of 2020 with enormous public health impacts. And modeling by various research teams warns that thousands more Californians are likely to die annually from wildfire smoke. And that's in addition to other health impacts for vulnerable populations, disrupting outdoor businesses and recreation. And all these estimates are based on trajectories before 2021 that factor in the increased pressures from future climate change. Over 2.6 million acres are so dense that they're considered extremely vulnerable to imminent mortality. But we can use thinning to reduce both fire risk and that mortality risk. And we can also use beneficial fire to restore these overly dense areas. So these efforts can prevent large patches of tree mortality that often create additional fire hazards like we saw in the Creek Fire. Biomass utilization is a key part of the forest restoration efforts because it can help reduce costs, lower carbon emissions, improve air quality. But currently, a lack of wood processing infrastructure is limiting restoration in many areas across the state. We know from work around community protection that's been discussed in the previous panel, that structure hardening, defensible space, ignition reduction, strategically designed and maintained fuel breaks are all critically important for protecting community areas. And we have to invest in those things in order to achieve our broader landscape goals, because unless the communities are protected, we're not meeting the highest fire hazard, and we're going to limit our opportunity to turn to a world where we're using more beneficial fire. The results of task force modeling and other recent research indicates that continuing to ramp up treatments would yield enormous benefits for air quality and human health across the entire state. It's in the billions or tens of billions of dollars annually because they affect so many people. Modeling conducted for Southern California and in the Lake Tahoe Basin also reports billions of dollars of benefits in terms of avoided structure loss and loss to homes. Task force modeling reported that expanded treatments would reduce loss of mature forest and timber and forest overall, as well as carbon stocks. And it also helps prevent the loss of habitat for a number of old growth species, including spotted owls and Pacific fisher, and a lot of the natural environment that we cherish as Californians. Also has benefits for expanding jobs, enhancing recreation, and promoting cultural values important to our tribal nations. So overall, the 10-year roadmap to resilience focuses on these three main elements: reducing hazard to communities and landscapes, restoring forest health and shrublands, and promoting long-term beneficial fire effects. We had several steps for assessing the levels of activity that would be needed to meet this long-term goal of improved resilience. Prioritizing communities and infrastructure is the top of the list to reduce hazards to life and property, reduce ignitions, and facilitate beneficial fire in the adjacent wildland areas. We prioritize based on wildfire hazard and tree mortality risk. And we narrow the treatments based on operational constraints, especially for mechanical treatments, especially considering factors like slope. Goal is to target at least 20 to 40% of wildland landscape areas to yield more beneficial fire outcomes. And we're also factoring in how to ramp up from the recent levels that we were discussing in the previous session to long-term maintenance and relying more on beneficial fire after the 10-year period. In Northern California and those two regions, there's particular emphasis on fuel break networks to support strategic fire management zones and treating high wildfire hazard areas near communities and in wildlands that have high risk of drought, insect mortality, and high risk of fire. It seeks to reduce fuels and reforest areas within large high severity patches, and as a follow-up to thinning or as a primary treatment, using prescribed burning or cultural burning or other beneficial fire in and across the wildland areas, and especially in and around recent fire footprints. So from a temporal view, this is what the roadmap prioritizes first, is targeting the highest wildfire hazard areas near communities and establishing fuel break networks, and also addressing the backlog of reforestation need from high severity fires. And in the second 5 years, there will be increased emphasis on treating high wildfire and mortality hazards in wildland areas and continuing to reforest any new high severity areas that need treatment, with a long-term goal of maintaining and treat these treated areas and maintaining that fuel break networks and increasing beneficial fire in the wildland areas. And so there's overlap on all these strategies, but it's kind of this temporal shift of what we're trying to do in the first 5, second 5, and to get us to that better place in the future. In terms of kind of acreage levels, these are our current estimates on ignition reduction, targeting roadside areas in particular, strategic fuel breaks along roadsides, and in the 50 to 75,000 acre range, a lot of thinning around community core areas, and then thinning with a combination of prescribed burning in wildland areas, including the wildland influence zone that's proximal to community areas. And that's a lion's share of a lot of the work that we propose. Reforestation in the 120 to 180,000 acre range, and that's a big step up from historic reforestation, but it's also in line with goals from the Forest Service under the Replant Act for California. And then estimating, ranges from 150 to 220,000 acres annually in prescribed fire, and ramping that number up over time. So in Central and Southern California, we have very similar strategies, but there's a focus more on protecting communities as well as our native shrublands by reducing ignitions and establishing and maintaining strategic fuel breaks. But there's also a big emphasis in terms of acreage on restoring montane forests and woodlands with combinations of thinning and beneficial fire. So temporarily, we see the same ramp up on focusing on ignition reduction, building and maintaining fuel breaks around infrastructure, strategic fire zones. And this is very much in line with the Forest Service-led strategy for the Southern California wildfire crisis strategy landscape. Treating montane forests and woodlands is already starting, but that would be a continuing emphasis over the 10 years and continuing to reforest areas. And then maintaining all those treated areas, which is very important in Southern California because you have to do frequent maintenance on those annual grassland areas, while encouraging appropriately scaled beneficial fire. So that's kind of what the numbers that we have looking at in terms of ignition reduction, 600 to 800 miles, targeting roadside areas with either mowing or other kinds of treatments to keep those flashy fuels down. Strategic fuel breaks, montane and woodland restoration using combinations of thinning and burning, and then reforestation as well as a need there. And then we pile this all up and compare it to the average annual footprint that was presented in the previous section from the recent times. We're definitely talking about a ramp up and looking at a range from somewhere around 850,000 to over 1.3 million acres, but a lot of that will be ramping up over the 10-year period. And then finally, we are talking about these levels at a statewide level, but all this work has to be grounded in local and regional planning and implementation. And so especially regional priority planning, community wildfire protection planning. This is an example of the Placerville Wildfire Resilience Strategy, which is taking those kind of decision tools to figure out where you would prioritize your treatments and then putting that on the ground. And so we've got all sorts of work in terms of pods planning for fire management zones, regional workforce and wood processing, and all that stuff really needs to be worked out at those regional levels. But we're trying to set the big picture here. That'll be a focus of the next session. But first, John is going to talk about the science basis that's informed a lot of this action plan.
Thanks, Jonathan. So it's my pleasure. I didn't get a chance to say good morning to him. Dr. John Battles, he's professor and Rudy Gott Chair of Forestry and Sustainability at the University of California at Berkeley and serves with me as co-chair of the Science Advisory Panel for the task force. This morning, John will describe the scientific basis and approach underlying the 10-year roadmap to resilience. John.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning. I haven't seen you since yesterday, I guess. Yeah, so my job basically is to, Jonathan laid out the plan and the details, and my job is to take a step back, show sort of the science underpinning that the roadmap is resting on, and also kind of to show our work so you can see where this information came from. Again, this universal, we've heard it all today, that we have this one major hazard. We have wildfire hazard, it's shared across the state, but it's not the same kind of hazard. It's not driven by the same kind of factors, and we need different solutions. And so we recognize that. We have forests in the state, we have shrublands in the state, we have climates that are different. So we need to sort of parse this out and start thinking about what are our priorities. And if you've seen, we've kind of put it into the forest-dominated northern part of the state and the shrub and woodland-dominated southern part of the state. And there's different priorities with sort of different primary treatments. You know, in the forested parts of the state, we really need to modify our fuel behavior in the forest. In these more shrubland states, we don't want more fire getting into these shrublands. We want to protect communities. So the goal really is for ignition reduction, to limit burn probability. So again, same hazard, but different priorities. Now, these priorities that we see separated across the state are just for our organizational purposes. Clearly, there's shrublands that we don't want to burn in Northern California, and there's forest in Southern California that we want to protect, but these are kind of the priorities. And of course, across the state, we need to encourage more indigenous stewardship whenever possible and as much as possible. One thing that we also share across the state is the value of strategic fuel breaks. They protect what we value most. And one of the main values here is not so much stopping fire or shutting it down, but really is to reduce the risk of uncontrollable wildfire. When these wildfires really get away from us and become super damaging, these fuel networks are very helpful. And we get this both from the sort of the academic side and the Forest Service side. We've tried thinking that what's the best way of putting these fuel breaks out there. You see here on the left an example from Alan Agar's work from the U.S. Forest Service looking at California, saying, what's the value of putting shaded fuel breaks along existing roadways, and what's the best configuration? And his work really shows the value of these linear networks that we link up, and so they're linked across the landscape, and we have these linear networks. Part of the value of the sort of agreement between Sierra Pacific Industry and the Forest Service is that they're able to connect up these fuel breaks on different landscapes and get that protection. Some really interesting work coming out of UC Berkeley, Scott Stevens' lab. Andrew Johnson's a finishing PhD student. His work shows looking at specific fuel breaks that once you build the fuel break, not only is that helpful, but if you can get wildfire suppression in there, you can get 3 to 5 times more effective. So this idea that you can reduce that risk of uncontrollable wildfire and give the firefighters a chance to actually do their jobs. These are super valuable. And we're seeing that kind of return on investment if you can build these out there. The other strategy, and you heard Jonathan put this, that we're going to treat the worst first. If you want the biggest bang for the buck, you go and focus on the most hazardous fuels, whether you're in a forested situation or down in a WUI area. In a forest situation, you want to treat the most hazardous fuels first. And again, looking at both research from the Forest Service and the modeling that came out from the task force that Spatial Informatics Group did, is that if you do this prioritization in the forest and you treat the most hazardous fuels first, you get a 3 times return on the investment, and as if you didn't have this kind of prioritization. When you're looking at ignition reduction, which is a focus for the southern part of the state, you get a 4 times improvement if you focus on the most hazardous fuels near our WUI areas. So you have a huge return on investment if you focus on do the worst first. Now, the other news is that to get to beneficial fire, we want to get there where appropriate. We have this enormous backlog. We think we need to treat 17 million acres of hazardous landscapes in California. But the good news is that we don't think we have to treat all of it. On the left-hand side here, you're seeing some early work that Scott Stevens and I did up in Sage and Experimental Forest, where they were planning treatments. We had these modeled treatments on the landscape, and we burnt these sort of simulated forests. This particular fire is going from the south in the bottom of the picture to the top. And you can see when the fire encounters a treatment that the rate of spread goes down. But the surprising part is that when it leaves that treatment, it continues to be reduced. You're getting this spatial adjacency, and you slow fire, you're like speed bumps. This yellow plume you're seeing is what was referred to now as sort of the shadow effect. So if you can get treatments next together, you don't need to treat the entire landscape. And this great research that Jamie Liderson led on the right-hand side shows that, look, there's a real return on investment. If you treat like 25 to 30% of the high severity landscapes, you get a huge dip in the high severity fire area. And if you do more, you don't get that much more. So we really want to focus on this idea to get to beneficial fire as fast as possible. We treat 20 to 40% of the most hazardous fuels first. And once we have that, once we've gotten the fire regime, so we're no longer sort of risking lives and communities and landscapes, and we can have it where we can have beneficial fire, then we really got to focus on sustaining the landscapes, these forest and shrubland health issues that Jonathan referred to. That there's a real value to reduce tree density, both to improve the vigor of our forests and to reduce their risk of loss to other disturbances like insects, diseases, and drought. And also that we have to definitely go into those severely burned patches from prior high severity and reforest those and replant those. In the southern part of the state, we really want to promote chaparral reduction and importantly, limit the spread of non-native grasses. One of the consequences of putting in these fuel networks, these fuel break networks, is that you do have the risk of getting invasive grasses established. And so we really have to pay attention to that. And these are the kind of priorities that a whole host of scientists from both federal, state, and academics think are the priorities. Another key part is that, as we've seen here, the value of getting all this information together. We have to have core metrics. We have to have analytics. We have to have outcome reporting. We need a way of doing this. We need a way of bringing this information together and making it useful. Fortunately, in California, we have the Wildfire Science and Technology Commons at UC San Diego. It's a national scale initiative to facilitate data-driven innovation and analysis for wildland fire. It is literally designed to be a digital platform for other users to go build on it, to take advantage of it. And the plan for California is that we will leverage this platform at UC San Diego and build the California Wildfire Commons. You've seen this this diagram on the right several times. This is what we're thinking of, how we bring all these metrics together, how we coordinate them, how we share them, and then importantly, how do we use them to get analytical products for both planning and outcome reporting. But it's no longer just squiggly lines and boxes, because every one of those blue boxes is a real product. You see the big success we have with the interagency treatment tracker, that's in there. We have a third version coming out of Planscape, an open and transparent decision support tool that's being used. I think it was used in the example that Jonathan said in Placerville to kind of help that planning. That's being built and improved. And importantly, we also have new metrics come online funded by the CNRA. We have the California Resilience Metrics, and we have the Works Project, which is a California and NASA cooperative to get us even better metrics coming forward. So we need to use them because we need to continue to learn where to put the treatments, how to put them. So taking a step back, in my profession, my professional journal, I'm an ecologist. The Ecological Society of America just started a new journal called Earth Stewardship. And it was part of this motivation for basically acknowledging that we as a scientist have failed. We have not sort of saved the earth. We have not reduced the risk to what's going on. And it really was a call that the scientists have to get more involved. They have to work with different disciplines and importantly, work with the community. And it's this idea of this hopelessness, hopelessness stands in the way of people taking active attitude. I think the task force, certainly for the scientists, is an active attitude. It provides us reason for hope. And I think some of that we're built on here, we also have reasons to hope as a society that we can master this. We have a decade-long push to protect communities and landscapes, a strategy that takes advantage of fire spatial dependency, a commitment to conserve and restore forests and shrublands, a plan that transitions from crisis response to proactive management, and an investment in producing and sharing information to support continual learning. Thank you.
Thank you, John and Jonathan. I think we have time for maybe a question or two from the executive committee, if there is one.
Well, let me just provide a comment and then over to you, Don. I'm super impressed by the lucidness of the presentation. And to me, this is just, you guys are incredible in kind of the emblem of what we want science to be, which is science to inform what we do, but to be action oriented. And your ability to be able to communicate this and to give us the confidence that this action plan that we're putting forward is based in the best available science is remarkable. So I'm really thankful for your contribution and to recognize that we have among the world's most sophisticated scientists building our understanding of this, and yet you're able to put it in words and directives, recommendations that can actually be implemented, that we understand. So I couldn't say enough about the work you do in the presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Don.
Great, thanks. I really appreciate both your presentations on this. I guess my question is thinking about, and Jonathan, I know you've got an extensive background in cultural understanding of fire, and how, and also to John, in terms of the science, how is cultural knowledge being included into this planning effort? And how confident are you that that integration is there to be able to carry forward the strategy?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I mean, we see if we can get this vision on the ground, it's going to create a lot more opportunity for tribes to be able to manage lands consistent with what they want to do. And, we didn't try to include like particular targets on cultural burning. We know that the beneficial fire strategy has some numbers in there. It's, going to be up to the tribes to kind of figure out how they want to go about accomplishing these things. But I think by having this emphasis on how do we treat and give ourselves this window of protection on our communities to let fire do more work for us, that's going to really open things up and also promote all the black oak forest, the sugar pines, all the things that tribes really care about in so intensely. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to talk about how to really embed more traditional knowledge in strategies. A lot of that work has to happen at that regional and local scale to figure out what you do where to make this really work. But there's so much knowledge. I think when we talk about the shrublands and different parts of the state, there's a lot that we We're currently have a very conservative approach on a lot of using fire in those areas. And I think there's a lot to learn from tribes in those areas.
Yeah, it's exactly that latter point that why I bring it up. And I know John probably knows that I was already going to go there. Is, you know, a lot of the conversations that I've had, particularly even last week at the AFA conference with tribal folks, it was about where we're going with Chaparral. And there's a strong feeling that the way that the state has been approaching the stewardship of Chaparral has been out of alignment of what cultural values are. So when we think about the problems of invasive species, you know, as grass driving the fire regimes and too much fire, the other side of it is how do you steward to ensure that there's the full representation of species needs and age class structures that are there to support them. And so I think that whatever the strategy is for going forward, like it needs to be inclusive of that to regenerate the mosaics in a sea of hopefully native grass and forbs, right? So I just put that out there as a thought. I'm glad to know that you guys are thinking about that.
Well, so I was, before I was starting to outline my closing thoughts, and I had written down, it's easy to be overwhelmed, but then John, you used that word hopeless, right? Because that's what a lot of people feel at times. And then that made the song, one of my favorite songs, go in my head, which is From Widespread Panic, Hope in a Hopeless World. And, you know, it's just about how do you look at the world in a different way. And, you know, for a long time, we use science to create regulation and to build this structure that creates these boxes that we've been. But now in the last couple of years, we're using that same science from folks like you to say, let's streamline that, because those reasonable alternatives are better than wildfire, better than catastrophic fire, because of the health impacts or impacts to communities. And so that's a call to action, right? It's how do we make sure that we're doing the best that we can every single day? And so just hats off to what you were saying.
Thank you. I'm just seeing that we're already in time for the intro of the next panel, so I think we'll keep moving if that's all right.
Just a quick comment here, Steve. Two takeaways I draw. One, you know, again, was your hopeful note at the end. I think all of us in this field have gotten the perception that because some years millions of acres are burdened, there's no way we can make a measurable difference with treatments that are hundreds or thousands of acres. So I think it's really, really encouraging to hear data that says if we attack the high priority landscapes with a level of effort that's not much higher than what we're doing now, that we can have resilient forests. So I think that's the thing that encourages me the most. The second thing that surprised me was when I saw these results, my first reaction was, well, wait a minute, this is a fire plan. Don't we need a natural resources plan rather than a fire plan for our landscapes? And the answer was interesting. It was, these are fire adapted ecosystems throughout California. And if you can't reduce that high intensity fire, we can spend all the money we want on recreation, on watershed management, on wetlands, on everything else. But if those landscapes are completely burned, we're going to lose everything. And so I think to Wade's always encouraging us to get beyond the fire community. And I think this data is a real wake-up call to the rest of the natural resources agencies and the conservation communities that fire is really the key to natural resource management in California, both preventing it to avoid landscapes from being wiped out and encouraging beneficial fire, because that's the key to biodiversity in so many areas of the state. So anyway, I thought it was breakthrough information. Just want to thank you guys also for synthesizing it so well.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Patrick. That's great. So I'm going to move us into our second of three panels. Switch the slides here. So as Patrick mentioned in his director's report, the action plan consists of 4 regional strategies that were co-developed with the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, federal partners, and other key regional partners, designed to assist those entities with funding, planning, permitting, project implementation, and reporting, outcome reporting. So the next 3 speakers that we have as part of this second panel, that's titled "The Draft Framework for Mobilizing Regional Action," will share with us how we're going to integrate the regional action frameworks. So I'm going to invite all three of you up, if that's okay, Forrest, Brian, and Chief Bigelow. And I'm just going to go ahead and introduce, how do you want to do this?
Just hand it over to me.
Yeah, I'll hand it over to you. Makes my job even easier. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. Pleasure to be in front of this executive committee again. And really, I'm going to keep it short because I really want to introduce our other two panelists, Brian and Frank, to introduce really two new pieces of our framework for mobilizing regional action that we'll be putting forth in the draft action plan. And first, reflecting on the presentations that we just heard, it's fantastic to have a statewide analysis to really understand where's the opportunity to treat, where are the priorities for treatment, but it's an entirely other picture to think about how do we put this on the ground through networks of tribes, state conservancies, fire safe councils, resource conservation districts, counties, towns, all sorts of organizations that are really responsible for knowing their landscapes and then for getting the work done. And so how do we actually identify where the areas of greatest hazard are and identify community values, cultural values that need to be obtained when doing this work? Because I can tell you no statewide modeling analysis is going to do that for us. And so we're going to hear first from Brian Newman-Lindsay, the program director for the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, on a framework to help enable and support regions throughout the state, help build capacity in these local and community-based organizations for each part of a program or project management cycle, from planning to permitting, implementation, reporting, and the funding that's associated with it. Then the second piece that's new is I've stood in front of this executive committee many times talking about the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, about landscapes. We've really been focused in that upper left-hand quadrant of this diagram. And sure, we overlap with fire-adapted communities, with fuel breaks, and fire management with strategic fire management zones. But where we haven't really been nearly as focused in thinking about these regional frameworks for capacity building has been on the community protection and the fire adapted communities side of that. And as we move forward, we heard from the last presentation that community hardening, community preparation, and community adaptation is non-negotiable in our attempts to move towards this fire future that we just heard with the roadmap. And so to that end, we'll be hearing from Frank Bigelow. I always struggle with his title. It's long. Frank Bigelow is the Deputy Director with CAL FIRE for the Office of the State Fire Marshal's Division of Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation. So first, to hear about our new framework for mobilizing regional action, I'll pass it over to Brian Newman-Lindsay. Brian.
Good morning. Thank you, Forrest, and thanks everyone. So we've heard a lot today about progress that's been made, and we've heard a lot today about things that need to be done. From our position with the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, where we've invested more than $150 million in planning capacity building over the last 6 years, and we've seen benefits from that. We have a network of really robust regional partnerships with regional priority plans, which we presented on in this room 6 months ago, getting ready to do this work. We have more than 1,000 projects conservatively that have been really mobilized and moved forward. We had in more than 1,000 vulnerable communities throughout the state of California, all 4 corners of California. And so good things are happening, right, in this cycle. But when we talk about where we want to go, when we talk about that 10-year strategy, and who's going to do that work, we need to take all those pieces that have been built and we need to connect them, right? There's a lot of moving parts. And if you want them to go smoothly, we need to do more than just kind of shake the box with the pieces in them. We have to actually connect those. So I'm going to run through these points of what the task force is doing through its constituent entities to do this. So that starts for us with planning. When I say planning, this is not just document. We're really talking about the whole complex of getting those partners together with a shared goal, governing framework for how they're going to move that plan forward, and then those targets, those priorities, those projects that it's going to go through. So we have this network of plans through R5C, but we're not the only plan out there, right? There's a huge amount of work that needs to accomplish specific objectives. So what the task force is doing is really creating a mechanism to connect those plans. So through the task force, DOC, all the constituent entities are supporting this push to standardize these subregions that you're seeing on the board. This is a draft, right? But this is really meant to be a coordinating framework. This is a layer where at the landscape scale, we can connect those regional priority plans, in particular the Forest Service plans, which are going to be tightly integrated, but also bring in CWPPs, also bring in wildfire mitigation plans, so that people can talk to each other and that there's this operating framework where we can identify what an all hands, all lands approach is going to look like. From there, we can go into really serious project development. And here we're really focused on permitting, right? We've talked about, you brought that up earlier today, but I was just talking to somebody who says it's taken them 4 years to wait for a permit to cut a hazard tree in a creek behind a school, right? Just shouldn't happen. So we've seen big successes here, and the big thing we're focusing on is how we're going to make those durable. So bring these pieces together, create a durable regulatory pathway to streamline permitting based off that strong foundation of these plans and partnerships. From there, you can get the work done, right? Nobody needs to tell me that we should do that. But here, this is really about having that impact at scale, right? And there's a few things that we're focusing on here is utilizing that new Good Neighbor Authority agreement, really making sure that when we say implementation, we're talking about high impact, large scale, or integrated all hands, all lands approaches, and that the operational capacity is there. So that's the workforce that we heard about. That's biomass utilization. That's really how are people going to get this done in a way that's really efficient and cost effective. And if we're going to do all that, we have to be able to talk about it. So I'm not the metrics guy. And for me, this is a little bit less about just being able to say, I don't even mean to downplay that, right? Being able to say what we do, but this is really about feedback. This is about making sure that our regional partners, local partners in the state have a common set of tools and understanding so that we're actually doing the same thing and communicating in the same way. And so here, we're going to be building off that framework you heard about, off the task force's push to support this outcomes-based measures. And state agencies are working together to figure out how we tie this together with our grants, with our reporting frameworks, with the things we support, so that there's this natural pathway that grantees know where they're going, partners know what they need to accomplish, and that those outcomes are represented. And then finally, but also first, you have funding. So this is really something that you need to enable this action. If we're going to bring all these pieces together, you have to fund them as a whole. You have to connect them through block grants and similar mechanisms, because it really doesn't work when the funding is coming in and out between these steps, right? So by doing the planning up front, and that carrying that through permitting, we have this project pipeline, we have implementation, we have reporting. People know where they're going, and then the state and our constituent entities and the feds can fund those as a whole. And when you get these kind of things together, you get this virtuous cycle. So through DOC, CAL FIRE, the state conservancies in particular, we've been working really hard on making sure that there's pathways to fund these programs in a durable way over time, not just 2 years, not just 5 years, but 7 years, 10 years. And that these pathways exist so that we can carry those plans forward, move them through this cycle, and then have that feedback with the task force. And then a lot of similar work is going on at the county scale within communities. So I'll pass it back to Forrest. Talk about what's next.
All right, thank you, Brian. And the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program has been so instrumental on this landscape side in building capacity, building out the plans. And one of the pieces that Brian didn't mention is there are so many regional priority plans already built throughout the state, helping to provide those project pipelines of work, understand what that work needs to be done on the landscape. At the same time, CAL FIRE and other organizations like in partnership with the California Fire Safe Council have been making great strides on the community side. And we're going to hear about that from Frank in just a moment. But really the key here is us being deliberate about how we are linking those two strategies together in the action plan. With that, I'll hand it over to Frank to cover what's been developed, progress that's been made, but also what comes next. That's your button right there.
All right, thank you, Forrest, and a great job getting the title correct. He nailed it. So I often stumble on it myself. So and following on the heels of Brian and talking about this kind of statewide strategy and regional strategies, I'm going to try to bring it down a little further to some local strategies. And we've heard a lot of terms today, like regional networks and planning and funding and implementation and reporting. But how do we do all that, and especially at the local level? One of the, as Forrest mentioned just now, one of the great collaborations that we have is through the California Fire Safe Council with the County Coordinator Program. And this, we've been, CAL FIRE, a proud sponsor of that and cooperator with the California Fire Safe Council. We're really proud of this program. As you can read on the slide, there was established in 2021, and it has had far-reaching impacts already. One of the things we're really proud of is the legislature also recognized the importance of this program and invested in it this year to fund $9.5 million to continue the work of the County Coordinator Program. We are in 57, and I say we collectively because I feel like this is a joint venture, but we are in 47 of the 58 counties, which is great. And through the efforts of those individuals across the counties, they've been able to secure $85 million that hadn't been available in those communities because of their outreach and because of their efforts and their initiative that they took to seek out those opportunities, and educated over 800,000 individuals across the counties, across the state, which is a monumental task in this time of people needing information and so they're actually doing the work to get the information to the people that need it. And another program at CAL FIRE that we are really proud to help further is the NFPA's FireWise communities. And I'm proud to report that in California, we have 1,481 communities in good standing in FireWise. And the County Coordinators Program has helped us develop and cultivate that program as well. But in some other areas, we also developed a CWPP toolkit. It's a community wildfire protection plan or county wildfire protection plan. In this toolkit, there's a plethora of information. This is available on our website now. I encourage you, if you're a community or looking into developing this, please go on our website. It has things like guidance on developing an action plan, plan management, partnership and outreach, and a whole host of other things, guide to requirements, best practices, as you can see on the slide. So this is a great document that we have and comprehensive toolkit that we have right now. And as mentioned, thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for making the announcement and stealing my thunder a little bit. But no better person to do it than you, so thank you. Available on our website now is the announcement of the people who were awarded the money for our greenhouse gas reduction cap and invest dollars. 84 projects, 41 of which of those are in low income and disadvantaged communities. That we have a whole host of other metrics available that we're really getting this prioritized across the state. Please look at the interactive map. It shows different years too of where that money's gone across the state. So what are we doing moving forward? Well, really excited about this part. I really want to encourage us to incentivize the counties to develop county-wide CWPPs that meet best practices and actionable projects that can prioritize funding based on priorities across all of their communities. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But also to what we're working on is integrating modeling, very specific modeling across counties that can help prioritize and inform projects. So, and we heard from Alan and from others, and it's not just about where to put fuel projects because we want to put fuel projects in. It's about biodiversity. It's about watershed. It's about having healthy places for our animals to live. It's about access and egress. It's about infrastructure protection. And the modeling that we're working on developing now gives us a comprehensive look at all of those things that's inclusive of the defensible space data that we capture, the fuels reduction work that we're doing on the landscape, and synthesizes all of that. It gives us feedback as to where we should prioritize those efforts, as well as gives us a cost to those things based on the slope and the vegetation type and the type of activity that needs to be done. So tremendous amount of efforts going into that now. The next is the recognition and certification program. We have, as I mentioned, Firewise, which I call the entry level way to get into fuels reduction work or fuels mitigation or engagement. And then you have some other standards out there, one of which is IBHS in a neighborhood level scale that is really the pinnacle of getting everything done. But there's really, we kind of have a gap in the middle. Like, how do we get people to go from Firewise to now go to some actionable items that they have achievable to move on from? And that's what this recognition program that we're working on developing will help achieve. Give those neighborhoods the ability to look forward and get to some actionable items, and then get some sort of either accreditation or certification from us that they've done step one. Now they need to go to step two, and hopefully that'll inform other advantages for them in the future. And now finally, and over time by 45 seconds, the county level is we feel the right level to coordinate these efforts for all things local hazard mitigation plans, evacuation planning, neighborhood home hardening strategies. And the reason for that is the counties have the ability to bring in all the different entities, whether it's planning, building department, road department, zoning, Caltrans, CHP, to do a comprehensive planning at the county level, keeping in mind that the communities can still do their community wildfire protection plans that roll up into this county plan. It helps inform this whole global piece across the county that allows for prioritization and the interconnection of resources from all those entities that I mentioned and many others, because our project doesn't just connect to us, it connects to all those different entities. And how can we leverage those to help prioritize our projects? So that's a little bit about where we're headed. So Forrest, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, and really that wraps us up. But in sum, we've been really focused on regional priority plans, which help us get at what we need at the landscape scale. But there's so much with home hardening, community preparedness, defensible space that we're really not connecting to. And we need to connect those more. And we're doing that through a network of community wildfire protection plans at the county scale and through regional priority plans through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. So thanks for your time. We're happy to share. Excellent. And in a moment, we'll hear from colleagues on some new interagency shared strategies and recommendations. But first, just want to reflect a little bit on what we heard. I think that this shared presentation between the first panel and the second panel has been really helpful to me and hopefully others to understand that this action plan that we're developing and launching in 26 both gets our arms around what is the broad need and how are we going to work at scale across the state. And to Patrick, your point, some really important findings about that we can do this by prioritizing the highest risk areas. But then at the same time, connect into our paradigm of the task force, which is recognize that regional leaders, local leaders are the ones that understand the risks best. And that by empowering them and having them lead the priorities, we'll get to where we need to go. So my question, was how are we going to link the two? And I think you've done a great job of, explaining that we are going to have a statewide set of targets and approach and strategy, but that it has to be linked to the work that's happening in the regions and that there's a really clear understanding of how to do that. And then, what Chief Bigelow has brought in is, it's a yes and. We need to expand treatment on the landscapes, but we need to continue to focus on and in communities. And it's really the connection between the two that's going to drive, the long-term resilience and prosperity that we know we want to create for California. So I'm excited because this has helped me to connect the dots on where we're going to go, and just would invite any other executive committee members to ask any questions. Oh, last thing I'll say is I definitely am excited by Chief Bigelow's recommendation around counties, the importance of counties, and interested if our two county supervisors, if that resonates with you, and if it does, how to just make that connection with all of our counties.
Sure. Yeah. First off, I'll start counties helping counties. It's a great strategy. In Madera County, Southern Sierra, I represent not only Madera County, but Yosemite Sequoia Resource Conservation and Development Council, another nice name, right? But there, we're working on community planning, right? And so we started in Madera, we did our protection plan, and then we took what we learned in Madera, and now we're replicating that in Fresno, hopefully to have, a more robust plan. So I think that's a good example of counties working closely together to develop some of these plans. I did have a question though that I wanted to pose to you folks is really around success, and what does success look like, and what does failure look like to a degree when we're looking up and down the state, and we're making investments. How are we evaluating, again, what success looks like? And then when there's a lack of success in an area or perhaps a region, what are we doing to, I guess, identify those areas and then help those folks get to that level of which I think we all want to be, right? So hopefully I'm making sense here with my question, but go ahead.
Sure. Well, I can say for our program, right, with Regional Forest and Fire Capacity, and when we're trying to support the task force, we look at, we look at a few different factors, right, in terms of how their ability to perform that work is increasing, right? Something we see is that there's big gaps between high resource, high capacity areas that have established partnerships and others. But also you see that there are established partnerships or places with long-standing practices that are not doing everything that you would want them to do, right? So one thing we're working on right now in close partnership with the conservancies and with the climate and energy team is coming up with a more transparent rubric for evaluating and communicating when we work closely with these regional partnerships and when we're evaluating plans, the extent to which we are seeing reflected effective governing strategies and effective mechanisms for moving progress forward, whether we're seeing that those projects that they're addressing specific needs and highlight that they can articulate those specific needs, then they have measurable interventions for each of those barriers. So for example, we'll have a place where they're saying like the ability to get prescribed fire on the ground here is just absent, right? Like we don't have the resources. We also don't have the community buy-in. So we're going to do like these 3 specific things that we think could make a difference. And we're trying to be really intentional about drawing the through line, both between the immediate intervention and what it's going to look like for completing that work, but also what how it ties back to those long-term outcomes of did more stuff happen, right? So I think that's part of it. And then I think return on investment is important when we're talking about funding. It's not the be all end all, but when we look a lot at leverage. And when we're talking about project development, something we see is pretty across the board. Our programs pulled in about 5 times as much leverage funding as it started with in terms of investments. Some places, especially where this has been really important, it's more like 20. We have places where it's 30 times investment, right? So you start to see the translation of those planning dollars into work. And then in terms of what we would do, right, when it's not pulling its weight, we have a very collaborative approach. So, but we also try to hold ourselves accountable to this task force and to the public. And so we work just really closely. We have a pretty amazing team of folks who are intensively interacting with these partnerships, sometimes daily, right, to try to correct those problems. And if it's not working, then we reevaluate.
That's a great question, Supervisor McCauley. And this is a question we ask ourselves often. Like we want to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing to do always. And that it's kind of how the fuels treatment effectiveness, as an example, was born as one way to measure success. Like, are we putting our fuel breaks in the right place? And as related to our California wildfire mitigation program for home hardening, we've been able to harden 103 homes as of today. But that hasn't been tested. So that's a success. We've done 103 homes that we've measured success. That's great. How we actually test that success is if a fire comes through. Hopefully that never happens, that we have to test it. So there's varying degrees of ways to measure success. If we grant out money to people and they are able to complete the scope of work through the period of performance, that's a great success. So we are constantly evaluating everything we are doing and measuring those degrees of success. And trying to learn from them every time to ensure that any program or any initiative that we put forward, that we implement those safeguards and that we achieve or try to achieve the greatest amount of success. And if we don't, we pivot. So it's a constant evaluation.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo Supervisor McCauley's comments. I'm so encouraged by this direction. I think, one of the things that often counties feel when we're dealing with the state is that we're the recipient of a lot of regulatory burden. And so to be able to have all this information, all this strategy, science and planning framework, and then to say, hey, we'd like to use this so to support counties, it really changes it from a burden to being a resource. So I think this is a terrific direction. I think also I wanted to share, what I hear from county colleagues is how important the county coordinator program has been. And I think it's a great tool because it's pretty flexible. Right? Every county can use it differently. I know a colleague in Trinity County they have a very active RCD. So that's the right place for the county coordinator to work with. Other places have great fire safe councils. In Napa, we have a county fire administrator. I'm going to give a shout out to JR who's here today. But everyone has a different set of tools. So to be able to say just what you were saying, Frank, that you're looking to incentivize what counties can do is terrific. So a question on that is, can you give us a little bit of a flavor of what that incentivization looks like? The toolkit sounds amazing. Is there technical support and other dollars too that you would see flowing down?
Yeah, a part of that was the next piece for that. The modeling is what we're working on is really to help inform those decisions at that level, to be able to give the technical support to inform those decisions. And because we're working on a specific product, that doesn't mean that it has to be that product. We're just going to establish a framework of things, a list of things that should be included when looking at a countywide perspective and developing out this plan. But having technical assistance from either county coordinators or from your CAL FIRE unit, your local unit, who will be trained in the utilization of these tools. And then, of course, the reporting aspect of it, which becomes very important at a countywide level when you're looking for additional dollars and you're able to take all the achievements that you've done in your county to the state level and say, look, this is what we've done. Or contrary to that, say, we need help. We haven't been able to do enough. Look, we're struggling. We need some help. So I think all of those things wrapped up and then the technical support, I think, is going to be a big piece.
One other thought about an advantage here is that counties, we work so closely with our residents. I think this is a great strategy to get closer to residents too, which that's who we want ultimately to buy in and take the steps they need to take to protect themselves and their communities.
Really good point. Miranda, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the goal of the additional regional level plans being proposed, if focus is going to be changing to the county level planning.
Can you repeat that?
With the goal of the additional, what is the goal of the additional regional level plans being proposed if focus is on county planning?
Yeah, well, I think what we've been trying to do is make sure that we're not creating any new plans. Which is why we're reliant on regional priority plans, which have been landscape focused, but connect into communities. And then similarly, through the tools that CAL FIRE is providing for community wildfire protection plans and incentivizing countywide scale, to still rely on those plans that counties, towns, communities, neighborhoods have been using for years, but really to incentivize those to better link with overall landscape strategies and vice versa. And yeah.
Well, I can just chime in on that also for the regional planning side. We approach the idea of what is the right scale for regional plan really humbly and look toward our regions to come up with an organic framework based off the actual jurisdictions. And so the stakeholders and the rights holders that need to be brought into that plan in order for it to be effective. So something we see is that a lot of our regional priority plans are also county scale CWPPs. They're the same plans in many, many cases. But what we are seeing also through the work of CAL FIRE and others is that especially on this fire adapted community side, especially where that overlap in that Venn diagram is less, there's a really strong natural synergy at that county scale. And so the question is, where that's already exists, how do we invest in the effectiveness of that county planning and then tie it together to this broader network using this sort of framework that Forrest described in a way that just reduces friction and not creates. So I think in a lot of places, the county plans are the same. Other places, the county plans are complementary, and we're just accepting that into the framework.
Thank you. And I'll say as we shift to the next panel, and maybe we could use this as an opportunity to bring up is there a final? No. Okay. So maybe as we shift to the next panel, and maybe ask them to come up, I will say that as we launch the 2026 action plan, I would really recommend, as I'm sure you're planning, a set of workshops to really unpack, the science behind the statewide direction, what our priorities are, and then how do we empower regions, with that information, and how does that change how we're conditioning money, for example, to block grants, et cetera, so that everybody really understands the action plan and feels empowered by it, and can actually operationalize it quickly. Yeah. Great. Thank you. All right, Steve.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. So this is the third part, the third leg, if you will, of the action plan stool. We heard about achieving resilience. That was the what. The first part of the how we just heard about in the regional framework. And this is the second part of the how. These are the interagency shared strategies and recommendations. So we're going to hear about 4 of 20 plus shared strategies and recommendations through 5 panelists. This includes wood utilization, state lands, workforce development, and an element of building a science-based framework. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to introduce the panelists individually, and then I'd ask that after you speak, you go here to the table with your name tag, if that works. So the first, I'm going to put this out here. Our first speaker is Christiana Darlington. She's a member of the Wood Utilization Working Group and represents the California Law Empowering Renewable Energy, where she's a principal attorney at law. This morning, Christiana will be showcasing a program funded by the Governor's Office of Climate and Innovation and detailing a framework of key opportunities to address the surplus biomass issue we have here in California. Christiana.
Thanks, Steve. All right. Okay, good morning. So yeah, my name is Christiana Darlington, and I'm here to talk about something that is a footnote or like a bullet point on most of the slides in the presentations, which is forest biomass. And forest biomass is the final step in a successful fuel reduction project. The project known as CalFrame was set up a number of years ago, and I'm going to go over what we've accomplished and what it looks like moving forward. So forest residues from fuel reduction projects have long been a bane in the side of those trying to accomplish wildfire reduction and forest resilience. Moving standing small trees and brush to piles on the ground, whether it's chipped up or not, does not always accomplish the desired outcome because sometimes it reduces the fire reduction and sometimes it even negates it. Also, leaving forest residue in the woods to decompose can also emit methane, which has climate impacts. If you choose to burn forest residue to get rid of it, that method can be risky, and it can also produce smoke that affects public health. Burning for waste removal also can reduce the amount of prescribed fire you can do in an area because there's only so much smoke that can be in one place at any given time. In circumstances where removal is needed, the costs are always an issue. The costs are primarily associated with the transporting of the residue, which when there are lucrative timber sales occurring, the cost from the debris transportation can be handled. But even in those cases, there are currently so few places to take the material, it doesn't happen. But without commercial timber paying for the forest health outcomes, the question always arises, who should pay for these costs? It's difficult to assign costs because the impacts of leaving forest residue behind can take time to accumulate. Contracting for the removal is cumbersome and special equipment may be needed. In the past, various types of entities have gathered, such as nonprofits, collaboratives, local agencies to work on these issues, and they've considered how to deal with this expensive waste challenge. Question how much volume of biomass, if left down, is a problem, and despite the impacts of burning or leaving it there, they often just can't arrange for it to be removed. Over the years, very little has changed. And so in 2022, or earlier than that, even in 2018, I would say, the task force committee started talking about these issues. And then in 2022, funding was approved over to then OPR, now Land Use and Climate Innovation, to pilot potential solutions across Northern California. The $7 million allocation was divvied up over a 25 county area roughly into 7 different pilot locations. The pilots embarked on putting together studies, bringing community meetings together, and determining what path forwards might work in their regions. Sorry. Okay, here's a map. So here are the location of the 7 different pilots. You can see a list of the locations here. They're basically 3 in the coastal area, 4, the 1 that's up in the top, and then there's mostly the Sierra. It doesn't cover all the Sierra, but a lot of it. The pilots located in forested communities wanted to take the response of forest residue challenge to the next level. They identified a need for stable, tangible legal entities to tackle the problem. They need these entities that can enter into contracts, own personal and real property, and even issue bonds or manage other financing tools. Cities and counties are obvious candidates, but many of these are overburdened and ill-equipped in rural communities and rural locations, and more impactful work can be done at a regional level. So the first order of business of the pilots was to figure out whether or not using a joint powers law would be helpful. Now I'm going to thank the insurance agency for being the first complicated presentation today. The path in place since the 1940s is commonly used. There are thousands of JPAs in California today. JPA agencies have members that are government entities of all kinds, and the JPA boards are made up of locally elected officials. JPAs can insulate their members, i.e. the local governments, from financial and legal risk. Similar to how opening a business protects the entrepreneur, local agencies create JPAs to handle challenging tasks, and forest biomass management is certainly a challenging task. After local engagement, we found 5 existing JPAs in the 7 pilot regions that took an interest in this work. And we also have a group of ambitious RCDs in the Northeastern California that are creating a new JPA. With the diligent support of Michael McGuire at LCI and others, the pilots also produced a myriad of studies relating to how much residue is available, what supply contracts, business modeling, other work. You can explore all these details in the handout on the table in the back of the room. So there is a handout about all those studies that we've produced, and I hope you guys will grab that on your way out. So now that we have the pilots identified and the legal entities are ready to ask the question, what can we do next? There are generally 4 focus areas of these topics. 1 is to increase the reliability of forest residue for commercial use. 2 is to increase the availability of workforce, specifically for biomass utilization. 3 is to provide businesses with technical support and support with supply. And 4, support local government efforts to streamline project development, including CEQA review. I'm going to go through those 4 now in more detail. So increasing supply. So this isn't about necessarily increasing how much there is. We know there's plenty. It's about the reliability of the forest waste stream. So with the development, the first idea we've come up with is called the Contracts Claims Fund. Many investors, lenders, banks, and developers identified the lack of long-term feedstock contracts as a major impediment to project growth. To address this, a study was conducted that showed that insurance products were unlikely to work to solve the problem, primarily because they do not write policies for more than 1 year. An idea was hatched that we consider a model based on the California Prescribed Fire Claims Fund. And with the help of Dave Jones, we're developing eligibility, pre-qualification, and claims processes. And we're looking at legislative package for this with funding from the Joint Institute for Wood Products. A full description of this tool will be coming to the Board of Forestry in January if you'd like to hear more about it. The other focus is to deal with erratic supply issues was the creation of a digital marketplace for non-industrial forest landowners. This is an interactive online portal that helps those non-industrial landowners find companies that can provide fuel reduction treatments and ways they can make sure their biomass gets removed and used. This tool is ready to go, thanks to the Watershed Research and Training Center. It's in the final tuning stages now, so you should be seeing that upcoming. The second big area I'm not going to talk about much, but it is very important to many of the pilots, which is to focus on workforce specifically geared towards biomass utilization jobs. So you'll hear more about workforce topics, so I'm just going to mention to keep in mind that the pilots would love to hear about how jobs can be created specifically in that sector. Third, these agencies would love to support both existing and new businesses with tools like GIS mapping, business plan development, legal contract review, insurance tools, et cetera. Also, note that some of these JPAs could enter into new joint powers authorities agreements to help supply. They can also own infrastructure, which sets them apart from other types of entities like collaboratives or nonprofits. When they own infrastructure, they can accept federal and state funding that would allow for them to manage that property and then lease it out to the private industry owners to keep them involved in the process. Okay, and then finally, CEQA. Okay, so the final big four focus areas is providing permitting support. And on this topic, there are many different types of permits you could talk about, but CEQA is primarily the area where a lot of projects ask for assistance. The JPA could support their own members, the public agencies that are part of the JPA, with things like education for their staff, internal process improvements, looking at their own county codes or city codes, and doing public outreach on crucial topics of the bioeconomy, including the use of forest residue and the businesses associated with it, explaining concerns or helping with concerns around environmental impacts. As shown to be the case in other programs, I want to mention local government engagement is essential, and we heard so much about local government already today. I wanted to mention that these regions are now fully ready to work on this topic. They have local buy-in and understanding from their communities on what they want to do with residue material and how to help the markets for it. And to continue the momentum, these groups need funding to staff up efforts to maintain their connections that they have. The JPAs can then be excellent partners with state and federal agencies. And additionally, several other regions have expressed interest, spoken with Supervisor Cottrell about this in the past. Additionally, now that we know how to do this, we think we could make other regions ready in the state much faster and quicker and cheaper than was done with this first set of pilots. So in summary, these teams have done a yeoman's work in achieving action item number 19 out of the 25 action items as we were listed in the action plan for 2025. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So I would invite the executive committee. Thank you. Can you stay? You can stay for the entire.
I can be here for 15 minutes.
Yeah, so Christiana can't stay for the entire session. So if there's a question for her now, I'd invite the executive committee to chime in. That's okay.
I think there are probably several questions we have, but I do think we need to move on because we're running quite late.
Thank you, Christina. Yep. Okay, now you get a tag team presentation. So this, I would like to invite both Michelle Selman and Angie Lottis up. Michelle is the Lands Program Manager with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and is co-lead of the State Lands Working Group. And this morning we'll be sharing some key findings, upshots, and lessons learned while developing and implementing their state land strategy. And then Angie is the Environmental Program Manager for for Natural Resources at California State Parks and co-lead with Michelle of the State Lands Working Group. And she will highlight important progress and key successes that's occurred across the state lands and beyond. And will also capture the core vision and priorities of how state lands fits into the overall wildfire resilience framework. I invite you both up.
Clicker band, this is.
Yeah, you can just hit that.
I'm just gonna
here if you want.
arrow down.
Yep.
Oh, advancing now. Well, he said that I can. It's time for technology challenges.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There we go. Got it now?
Yeah, I suggest using the arrow keys.
I think I have it now.
Yep.
Good morning.
Okay.
Okay, this will be even more of a lightning talk than it was already going to be. Good morning, everybody. Nope, it's afternoon. I think we tipped over. I'm Michelle Selman. I'm the Lands Program Manager with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, as you heard, and one of the state lands co-leads along with Angie Lattes. And we're officially called the Resilient State Lands Working Group. Why does that matter? Well, among California state agencies, we actually manage about 3.8 million acres of land. And while in the large footprint of California, that might not seem like much, really, we're talking about some of the most unique and precious ecosystems and sensitive species and habitat that you'll find throughout the state, which we know is a biodiversity hotspot. It's also an important location for folks to get outside and recreate and connect to the land. We're protecting sensitive cultural resources, and also our essential road infrastructure and the right-of-ways are an important part of our state lands and are at risk of fire. So you can see the membership of the State Lands, Resilient State Lands Working Group here. A number of entities that are the largest state land owning and managing agencies, as well as a few of the conservancies that grant funds out to private and state lands. These represent the largest land managing entities in California at the state level. So we've been meeting for about 4 years. We were actually tasked in the original action plan with coming together to form a joint strategy for resilient state lands, because we're actively managing over 400,000 acres of your public lands every year. And it's imperative that we work together to identify the best strategies and the most efficient way of leveraging our limited resources to accomplish our goals. We realized early on in our meetings as we were getting together to develop our strategy that we had very different priorities and mandates across the different state agencies. But at the end of the day, we all have a common goal of wanting to increase wildfire and fuel resilience on our state lands. We learned that collectively, these differences that we bring to the table in terms of our mandates, priorities, and skill sets are actually a value when we get together and share them and we learn from each other versus working in silos. You've heard today a lot about acres treated and how that's really only just one part of the story. We agreed, we thought the same thing back in 2021 and incorporated that idea into our joint strategy, because recognizing that while we're really proud of the 400,000 plus acres that we've already treated, across the state annually, that really that's only a part of the story. In some cases, state parks colleagues, for example, are working in old growth forests, sequoias, and redwoods where there hasn't been any management in over 100 years. And so it's very slow and careful work with a lot of planning and permitting needed. And yet that very small acreage of treatment is critically important for protecting those resources. And we came to realize, fairly quickly that the work that we're doing, we're making tremendous strides on the ground, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to sustain it over the long term with permanent staffing and funding, which is why we're very grateful that the voters passed Proposition 4, which will provide funding to continue the work that we've been doing in the last 4 years in the coming years. And support our staff as well as the projects we've worked on. So just very quickly, I could highlight a number of our really great projects across the state, but just want to talk about one that's a little unique and highlights the struggles that we face in working in these very sensitive habitat types, where we have the need to do fuels reduction work, but also have sensitive species. In this case, the monarch butterfly, which uses eucalyptus as a surrogate species for overwintering in California, and is often a target for fuels reduction work. At the department, we've been spearheading identifying best management practices. And this one particular project you can see at Elkhorn Slough, we went in and were able to, with the help of our CCC partners, remove the heavy fuels, both at the floor of the understory, and then also some of the dead and dying trees, which now we're going to keep the rest of the stand of eucalyptus, but moving forward, it'll continue to be overwintering habitat for monarch butterflies. And a number of these eucalyptus groves that the department manages are right up against urban communities. So it really highlights the challenges we face in managing lands with sensitive species in these landscapes. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Angie Lottis at State Parks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. The infusion of state lands funding at state parks has sparked advancements for natural resources management across our 1.6 million acres. Specifically, also with beneficial fire. Funds have been used to pay in part for over 400 staff, has replaced and increased equipment, which in some cases was shared across a 4-county area or originally purchased in 1980, and has significantly advanced our training and workforce development statewide. With all of this as a foundation, State Parks has been able to reintroduce beneficial fire in some of California's most iconic landscapes, as mentioned, like the northernmost population of old-growth giant sequoia and Calaveras big trees, and in the woodlands of Mount Diablo. This photo is from a recent State Parks Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, many of you should know as TREX. It was the first time we've done this at State Parks, and leadership at that TREX training, the leadership team was evenly split between men and women. We also, by chance, featured the department's first documented all-women division on this training, almost by accident. And here they are burning in Cruz Rhododendron State Reserve on the Sonoma coast. This photo is from another burn completed during that 9-day training at Gersel Cove. This fire eliminated rattlesnake grass debris to expose bare ground in the unit. It provided improved habitat for native pollinators and hopefully will allow native coastal prairie species to germinate this spring. We couldn't do these things without this work and this additional funding. This training at TREX supported over 50 participants across 8 agencies, including local and federal government, and we had UAS and engine modules. Very successful, pretty involved training. I'm going to talk now a little bit about our Resilient State Land Strategy. The type of work that Michelle and I have described is the type of work that we will continue funding with climate bond funding now. Some of this Resilient State Lands Working Group members have funding of their own, and some of us are sharing an allocation that came to State Parks and Natural Resources Agency to make sure that this work can continue. The funding is a wonderful bridge, and we'll also be working to supplement it with grant funding and partnerships. Our work plan for 2026 and beyond, that was a fun point in this opening of the introduction. Sorry for that. So our work plan for 2026 and beyond is represented in the Joint Strategy for Resilient State Lands, which will be released in the coming months. The strategy has 4 goals, building on the learnings that Michelle mentioned earlier at the start of our session and designed to achieve the work that we've all been discussing throughout the day today, as well as the missions of the individual departments, which are rooted in several different things, and which of course helps build to the strength of the working group. Our first goal is to align, continue scaling and sustain the programs we've grown over the past 4 years. We need to keep supporting the growing the workforce to keep delivering the numbers that we've been putting up. And we would like to modestly add another 50 to 80,000 acres of treatment over the coming years. And we believe we can do that. Improving coordination and strengthening collective action is another goal of ours. It's a lot of the work that we do in our statewide working group by identifying gaps and sharing data, knowledge, and resources. An example of this is the sharing of the Prop 4 money when we realized that some of our members would be left without the ability to keep doing work. Our third bullet here is demonstrating high quality and cost-effective work, which luckily we've been talking about already today, so I maybe don't need to make the case of why that's important. But we do deliver acres in a way that demonstrates a range of activities. We use all sorts of different fuel reduction, beneficial fire, grazing, and other methods, roadside clearing, to achieve the various goal priorities of our teams. And so a range of activity types, and we also achieve a number of additional benefits like ecosystem functionality and biodiversity protections. Finally, the last bullet up on the screen, which Michelle and I are feeling really excited about this exact moment, is increasing regional approaches and cross-boundary collaboration. We want to take the successes that we've experienced here in Sacramento and move it down to our districts and regions. That'll, of course, also include bringing RFFC and CWPP plans and the groups that represent that work into the work that our folks on the ground are doing. And so just want to say thank you for all the support and the platform that you've given us to do this work, and we really look forward to continuing.
Thank you, Angie. Our next speaker is Emily Blackmere. She's the Director of Government and Community Affairs with Sierra Business Council, and she's been co-lead of the Workforce and Career Development Work Group. This morning, she'll be sharing some recommendations to support the people and organizations that we rely on to do the critical work leading to wildfire resilience and community protection.
All right, thank you. I'm Emily Blackmer. I'm the Director of Government and Community Affairs at Sierra Business Council, presenting today on behalf of the Workforce and Career Development Work Group, which was co-led by me and Allison Jolly of the Watershed Research and Training Center. Before I dive in, I do want to recognize Allison and the Watershed Center. The work I'm going to talk about reflects the decades of thought leadership that they have provided on this issue, and the work was truly a team effort. So why does workforce matter? Everything that we've been talking about today, everything in the action plan depends on the size and capacity of a workforce to implement it. Otherwise, we just have a lot of really good ideas. The existing workforce will constrain our ability to increase pace and scale. We already see high rates of attrition in this sector, with compensation and culture frequently cited as motivations for leaving the sector. That said, we have come a long way since 2021. The action plan published in that year did not include the word employee or career once. But since then, the task force has published a report on the forest sector workforce and supported multiple iterations of a working group. CAL FIRE has awarded $130 million in business and workforce development grants and really highlighted the importance of career pathways and workplace culture in its strategic plan. The Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program has invested in people across the state, and that doesn't even mention the dozens of local education and training programs across the state. So I'm going to share some recommendations from the report that we presented to the task force recently, Advancing Wildfire Resilience, Workforce, and Career Development in California. This was developed with input from over 65 subject matter experts and practitioners across the state. These folks have expertise as employers, trainers, educators, funders, and of course, as members of the wildfire resilience workforce themselves. And they bring perspectives from nonprofits, agencies, tribes, Native-led organizations, schools, other academic institutions, private businesses, and special districts. And our process included interviews, surveys, qualitative data analysis, multiple working sessions with contributors, and they also had the chance to review and provide input on draft recommendations. Before diving into the recommendations, I do want to share 4 key concepts that underpin the recommendations and also reflect what we heard from contributors. So first, which workforce are we talking about? Thanks, Christiana, for sharing this graphic, giving a preview. We all know that the wildfire resilience sector encompasses a really wide array of people, skill sets, and expertise. Many of those, but not all of them, are illustrated in this graphic. So we are not only talking about forestry and fuels, but we are also talking about coordinators, managers, administrators, outreach and communication specialists, planners and analysts, defensible space and home hardening professionals, policymakers, and the list goes on. The second key concept is good jobs. If this sector is going to be competitive enough in the labor market to increase pace and scale, wildfire resilience jobs need to be good jobs, meaning that they are competitive not only in terms of compensation, but also across the board. As it stands, entry-level jobs in the wildfire resilience sector can be harder to find, harder to apply for, lower paid, and more dangerous than a job in a fast food restaurant. We will not increase pace and scale with that as the status quo. Third, it's not enough to talk about jobs. People also need to be able to build careers in this sector. Once we recruit people into the workforce and train them, we want to keep them. We don't want to lose the expertise of our wildland firefighters when their life circumstances change and they need a job with a little more flexibility. And we want our entry-level fuels crews to understand where they can go next and how to get there. So we need to build visible and accessible career pathways that allow for vertical and lateral transfer within and across subsectors. And the last key concept is that we need to be thinking about career pathways at every stage of an employee's career. Employees need to know their options and be supported in pursuing those options from pre-employment training and education to recruitment and onboarding through professional development to becoming a mentor, teacher, and leader as an experienced professional. So what can we do to ensure that the wildfire resilience sector meets these critical needs? Our full report has 7 recommendations with 35 implementation steps. I'm going to highlight the top line recommendations briefly, noting that some of these can be led by the state or federal agencies, while others do require a broader, more grassroots approach. So recommendation number 1, we need to increase exposure and access to the diversity of wildfire resilience jobs and career paths. Through local and regional partners across the state, we can support traditional and non-traditional education, training, recruitment, and advancement opportunities. Number 2, we need to improve access to and pathways for state wildfire resilience careers. It needs to be easier to get and advance in state jobs in this sector. Number 3, we need to leverage grant programs to invest in workforce and career development by making workforce and career development expenses, eligible expenses in all wildfire resilience grants as a down payment on future capacity, skills, expertise, and leadership. We need to support employers with HR development resources that bolster organizational capacity to better support their own employees. We need to foster healthy workplace cultures by integrating thoughtful leadership, mentorship, communication, and team building, training, and support systems across the board. We need to consult and collaborate with tribal entities and practitioners to develop specific investment policy and programmatic opportunities to support our tribal workforce and practitioners. And we need to stimulate and stabilize jobs, employees, and employers through innovative mechanisms that make working in this sector or running a business or nonprofit in this sector less financially insecure. So in conclusion, California's ability to reduce wildfire risk, to protect communities, and to steward landscape relies on a skilled, diverse, and supported workforce, and it's up to us to make that happen. So thanks for your time and happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Emily. So our final speaker of this session is Dr. Kyle Cabasares. I'm sorry if I didn't get that correctly. So he's a physicist by training, maybe the coolest guy in the room. He studied black holes in deep space, but now works for the NASA Ames Research Center in Moffett Field, California. Kyle will be previewing in a little more detail here the LiDAR products you heard earlier today that will be available from across the project continuum from planning all the way to assessment to help achieve the goals of the task force. Kyle. You could just hit this button too. Gotcha. That is.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Cabasares, and I'm a research scientist at the NASA Ames Research Center. I'm part of this project known as the Wildfire Ecosystem Resilience and Risk Assessment Initiative, also known as the WORK project. Now, WORK is this collaborative partnership between the California Natural Resources Agency, the California Air Resources Board, and the NASA Ames Research Center. So WORK's mission is to create novel, updatable, and high-resolution data products to evaluate the impact of land management practices and track land cover changes across California's diverse ecosystems. So these products include a change detection and attribution product, which is designed to deliver a comprehensive, updatable, and accurate accounting of ecological disturbances and recovery. The product will deliver annual maps showing where wildfires and other disturbances have occurred. We have a land cover classification and mapping product that will provide updatable classifications of the most common land cover types to improve understandings of California's landscape changes. an individual tree monitoring product that features tree canopy maps that can differentiate between live and dead trees using artificial intelligence. It will help improve our understanding of how disturbances such as drought and wildfire impact California's forest ecosystems. A built structure mapping product that contains information such as area, height, and volume of built structures such as homes and commercial buildings that can be used in state level planning and decision making, including estimates of fire emissions and land use applications, and statewide treatment assessments, effectiveness assessments, which incorporate and combine the 4 products that I've just described above with additional data sources to derive new insights and more targeted actionable data products. So some examples include, but are not limited to, quantifying above ground biomass statewide, identifying changes over time and assessing the impacts of forestry management across the state on above ground biomass, or for example, assessing hazardous vegetation proximity to both built structure and utility distribution lines that could pose significant wildfire risk. Now, I will talk to you about a separate product that I've helped develop, which are LiDAR-derived maps, which are used to support the development of the other 5 products that I've described. For example, LiDAR can be used to provide tree heights for the individual tree monitoring product, or it can be used as an input for the built structure mapping product, which uses artificial intelligence that needs certain variables like heights to train and learn on. But the LiDAR products provide unique insights on their own. But before I can actually get into the details, I think I should probably cover just how the basics of LiDAR works. And as you were told, I'm a physicist by training, so I get to talk to you a little bit about the physics of how this works. So the way that this works is that effectively you have a laser beam mounted on a plane, and you use those laser beams to measure how far objects are. And so you just shoot a laser at an object, and you wait for it to come back to the sensor, and based on how much time that took, you can measure how far objects are. The actual raw data that comes from the LiDAR acquisitions are these 3-dimensional point clouds, which can be a little bit difficult to interpret. And so what's useful to do is often convert those 3D point clouds into 2-dimensional maps of different quantities of interest, like for example, height above ground, which is this 2D map that you are looking at here, which again just represents how tall things are relative to the local ground level. So what we've done at NASA Ames is create this LiDAR data workflow where we take those 3D point clouds and generate many types of 2-dimensional maps that cover variables such as bare ground elevation, height above ground, canopy cover, and canopy height statistics. So we've created data at 3 different spatial resolutions, 1 meter, 10 meter, and 30 meter, depending on the map type. And in terms of their applications, these maps, particularly height above ground and the canopy cover and the canopy height statistics, are a valuable resource in terms of identifying the presence of ladder fuels and the vertical distribution of vegetation in an area. I actually had the pleasure of supervising interns at NASA Ames this summer whose project focused on incorporating LiDAR and other remote sensing tools to assess and quantify the proximity of fire hazards to people's properties in the WUI and improve home fire event strategies. Lastly, I want to announce that a subset of the full amount of LiDAR data that we have processed are available for public download through that QR code. These data include 10 and 30 meter resolution statewide mosaics across all the different map types, as well as select 1 meter resolution topography data in specific regions in California, such as in the Los Angeles area in both 2023 and 2025. So you can really get this good pre and post wildfire analysis. And to my knowledge, this is the first time that all the public LiDAR data from USGS and California has been combined and put together kind of like a jigsaw puzzle to generate these statewide maps. And we're really happy at NASA Ames to have played a role in creating these products and bringing them into existence. There are still a few gaps left, remaining LiDAR data sets from USGS that we haven't gotten to yet, but we're committed to finishing the job in the new year. So the subset of this data is being hosted from our partners at the San Diego Supercomputer Center at UC San Diego. So we're very thankful for their support, and we're also exploring more options at NASA to release the data in a more accessible and actionable form. So with that, I thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. That was terrific. I'll open it up. I know we're a little over on time, Secretary Crowfoot, but if there are any questions or comments.
Great. Thanks so much. Any executive committee members have questions? We are a little over time, so, but I will say just as, first of all, huge thanks for NASA Ames engagement. This is a really exciting milestone. We've reached 104 million acres with one sort of comprehensive LiDAR set of data, which is remarkable. And now with your help, having these products that can be utilized beyond just wildfire management and wildfire resilience in so many different environmental management. So huge thanks. Great public-private, state, local, federal partnership. And then thanks to you all for your stewardship of these strategies over time. It's really exciting. And to me, it's really forms a sort of like the flesh on the bones of a lot of our work. I would say moving forward into 2026, I think it's really important to have goals that are measurable. So Angie, I love the idea around identifying, is there an additional scale target that state agencies are looking towards? Or on the workforce front, I'm really interested to know if there are specific gaps in types of employments or contractors in different parts of the state. And then therefore we have a goal of making sure that there's a certain workforce. So I think, a lot of the work of the strategies, I think in the first couple of years is making sure the right people are in the room and understanding the need and the sort of the problem statement. And I think now it's really getting to, okay, specifically, where do we need to figure in? What specific actions do we need to take within all of these strategies moving forward? So we'll appreciate the specificity to the extent possible in the 2026. Yeah, please.
Thank you. And I'm glad, Christiana, that you're still here and I appreciate your point that the biomass discussion, this is one tool in the toolkit of all the goals of the resilience plan. But also, I know that we need to continue to develop that ecosystem. And I know that the CPUC is planning to sunset Biomat this year, which has a lot of projects that were kind of in the queue. And so can you speak to, if that goes away, what kinds of things should this plan be looking at to make sure that we're continuing to develop and keep the momentum there?
Great, and I'll try to keep it quick for everyone. So yeah, the Biomat program will be taken up by the CPUC on the 18th. And the first thing I'd say is let's not let the CPUC make the wrong decision on the 18th. And so everyone can make their choices in advocacy positions, but there's that. Then the reason being, even if you want to say that the Biomat program hasn't achieved all of the objectives that they set out to achieve, you need to have something to replace it with before you end it. So, I think that is what everybody can agree on in terms of the Biomat program. Just as a reminder, the Biomat program is a small scale electricity subsidy program basically for communities that want to do projects for small scale electricity biomass projects. So if it does go away on the 18th and we don't have a replacement program for it, it will set back several projects that have received $10 to $50 million grants to build these projects. So that'll be a bummer. And we'll need to really get on it in terms of finding something else, to replace the situation with. Just keeping in mind that small scale electricity production is not like the large scale facilities that have been around. There's a lot of differentiation that I could explain in wearing my Air District hat. So anyway, hopefully that's somewhat helpful. And I try to keep it under a minute for you, Wade.
So I'll just say we will just in the interest of time to the closing remarks of the executive committee, unless there are other questions for the panel. Dr. Secretary Crowfoot.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, panel.